I never believed in omens. To me, life was a pattern of cause and effect. No ghosts, no signs, no cryptic warnings scratched into bathroom stalls or carved into trees. I was a practical man. I still am, or at least I try to be. But nothing logical can explain the blood. The first time I noticed it was on a cold Wednesday morning, the kind of morning where breath fogs the air and the frost bites at the edges of your window panes. I live alone in a modest rental, 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and a front door that sticks slightly when the weather turns. I'd lived there for over 5 years. Nothing strange, nothing scary, until that day. The blood wasn't a puddle or a smear. It was a trail of small, uneven droplets that started somewhere off the street and led directly to my doorstep. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow, deliberate line of dark red dots that wavered slightly in their path. I bent down, thinking it might have been a wounded animal, a raccoon maybe, but the droplets were too round, too perfectly spaced. Like footsteps, like something or someone had bled steadily as they approached my home. I followed the trail backward. It only stretched about 20 feet before it abruptly stopped at the edge of my yard, as though the bleeder had simply appeared from thin air. There were no tire marks, no human footprints in the frost, just those damn droplets. Inside, everything seemed normal. My front door was locked from the inside. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. But the air smelled. Off. Slightly metallic. Like rust. Or blood. I told myself it was a prank. Maybe neighborhood kids playing a sick joke. I cleaned the droplets off the porch, doused the concrete in bleach, and left for work. By the time I returned that evening, the blood was back. Not just outside, inside. I found it in the hallway between the living room and the bathroom. A neat little trail of droplets, forming the same path as before. I stood frozen for nearly a minute, keys still in hand. The hallway was dimly lit by a single bulb overhead, which flickered briefly as I stared down the hallway at the stain. No one could have gotten in. Every window was locked. My security alarm, I checked it twice, hadn't gone off. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the living room with all the lights on, a kitchen knife within arm's reach. Every floorboard creak, every gust of wind outside made my skin crawl. But nothing happened until 3:13 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I checked the microwave clock. That's when I heard the whisper. It came from the hallway. A soft, slithering hiss that didn't sound like words at first. Just breath. Then something clearer. "Are you bleeding yet?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. I gripped the knife tighter and stood there, motionless, trying to convince myself I was dreaming. The hallway was empty. I walked to the entrance, heart hammering, and flipped every light switch I could find. No one was there. The trail of blood was gone. Wiped clean. The floor sparkled like it had been scrubbed. That was the first night. The next morning, my doormat had been turned over. Beneath it, written in rust-colored chalk, were the words, "It comes back when you look for it." I didn't know what that meant. I still don't. But from that day on, the blood trails started appearing more often. Always small. Always neat. Never more than 20 feet. Always leading to my front door. Never away. I told a friend about it, Marcus. He laughed at first, thought I was being paranoid. So I invited him over. He stayed the night. Brought beer. We watched old horror movies and joked about ghosts. He left the next morning, telling me he hadn't heard a thing. No blood, no voices, no chills. But the next day, I got a call. Marcus was in the hospital. He'd been found unconscious in his apartment, blood pooled around his feet from his own nose. Doctors said it was a massive, spontaneous hemorrhage. Nothing they could explain, no warning signs, just a sudden explosion of capillaries, like something had pressurized his sinuses from the inside. He survived, but he wouldn't talk to me afterward. When I visited, he refused to see me. The nurse said he had a message for me, though. He'd whispered it during the night, thinking I was in the room. It stepped through his door. Since then, it's been escalating. I've found blood in places I've never touched. In my dresser drawers, in my fridge, on the inside of the bathroom mirror, not the surface. The inside, like it had bled through the glass. And always the same whisper, always around 3:13 a.m. Are you bleeding yet? I've stopped trying to clean it. No point. It's always back by morning. Sometimes thicker, sometimes darker. And last night, I found something new. Under my pillow. A single tooth. Not mine. By the time I found the second tooth, I had already accepted that I was no longer alone in my own home. But accept doesn't mean understand. I wasn't prepared for what was coming, for how quickly things would spiral once I made the mistake of asking questions. The tooth was found in the silverware drawer, not lying on top, but carefully tucked beneath the soup spoons, the kind of placement that felt deliberate, almost gift-wrapped. It was the same as before, small, human, intact, root and all, a molar, still flecked with dry blood. I'd barely slept since the first one. My dreams had turned black and humid, filled with the sound of slow breathing and soft footsteps circling my bed. Every morning at 3:13, I would jolt awake, not from any sound, but from the pressure in the air. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the room around me thickened, like something was standing over me, pushing its presence into the space between my heartbeat and my thoughts. And always I would find blood, on the window latch, under the bed, on the ceiling fan once, tiny dots flung outward in a perfect arc, as if from a spinning wound. I started documenting everything. I took photos, logged the time, location, color, even the smell of each stain. Because they changed. Some mornings the blood was fresh and bright. Other days it was brown and waxy, like it had been there for years. But what broke me, what shattered the illusion that I was dealing with something explainable, was the video. It happened 4 nights after the second tooth. I'd installed a small motion-activated camera in the hallway, the one that led to the front door. I pointed it directly at the floor, hoping to catch the source of the trail that appeared each night. I watched it live until 2:30 a.m., then passed out in a chair with a blanket over my shoulders. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. For hours, nothing happened. Just the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional flicker of hallway lights. But at 3:13 a.m. sharp, the camera clicked on. There was no person, no shadow, just blood. The droplets didn't fall from above. They rose. I swear to you, they rose up from the floorboards like reversed rain, one at a time, forming that same trail toward my door. And in the background, faint but unmistakable, the audio picked up something else. Not breathing, not a whisper, laughter, high-pitched, childlike. It bubbled softly behind the hiss of static, and then silence. I unplugged the camera. That morning, I called the landlord. I didn't give details, just told him there were leaks, that something was wrong with the floorboards. He said he'd be over by noon. His name was Henry, a retired contractor in his 60s. Nice guy, the kind that chews tobacco and calls everyone kid. When he arrived, I made coffee while he pulled up the hallway boards. Within 5 minutes, he called me over with a shaky voice. "Kid, you said there were leaks." There were no pipes underneath that section of floor. No water lines. Just a smooth, untouched concrete slab. But smeared across the underside of the floorboards, soaked deep into the wood grain, was blood. Thick, viscous, and still wet. Henry recoiled and stood up fast. He looked pale. "You messing with me?" I shook my head. He didn't say much after that. Packed his tools and left in a hurry. Later that evening, I got a call from him. He sounded like he'd been crying. "I don't think I can come back there," he said. "That wasn't right. That wasn't normal. I ain't ever seen anything like that." He hung up. That night, the blood trail didn't stop at my front door. It went past it. It snaked across the living room rug, through the kitchen, and ended at the basement door. The one I always kept shut. The one I hadn't opened in over a year, mostly because it smelled like mildew and dead air. But now there were footprints. Bare. Human. Tiny. Like a child's. They were imprinted in the blood, walking toward the basement and stopping right at the threshold. I should have left. I should have packed a bag and driven until I couldn't remember my own name. But I didn't. Instead, I opened the door. It was pitch black. The light switch didn't work, hadn't in years. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped down slowly, each board groaning louder than I remembered. The air was colder down there. Thicker. It didn't feel like a basement. It felt like a tomb. And at the very bottom of the stairs on the dirt-packed floor, I found a circle, drawn in blood, maybe 3 feet wide. In the center, something was buried, a lump of cloth or maybe burlap. I knelt, gently brushed the dirt away, and uncovered a coat. A child's coat, faded yellow, old, with rusted buttons and a ripped left sleeve. Inside the pocket, I found a third tooth, this time wrapped in wax paper. As I unwrapped it, I heard a sound that didn't belong. Not in that space. Not in any space. It was the click of the basement door shutting upstairs. Then soft breathing behind me. I spun around. No one there. But when I looked down again, the circle of blood had grown. It now surrounded me. I didn't sleep the night I found the circle. I couldn't. I sat at the top of the basement stairs, flashlight still in hand, door shut behind me, back pressed hard against the wall like I expected it to breathe. The tooth I found in the coat pocket, I didn't bring it upstairs. I left it down there, wrapped in its wax paper like it wanted to stay buried. But even above the basement, I felt it. Like the blood from the circle had soaked into my thoughts. My ears rang. I kept seeing the coat when I closed my eyes, yellow, too small, the kind you'd put on a 6-year-old for the first day of school. Why was it down there? How long had it been buried? By morning, I started noticing changes. Not to the house. To me. I stood at the bathroom sink brushing my teeth when I noticed a red streak in the whites of my eyes. Not a bloodshot line, but a distinct swirl, like something was spiraling in. I leaned in, blinking, thinking it was just exhaustion, but the longer I stared, the more it pulsed. And then something dripped from my nose. A slow, wet trickle. But it wasn't blood. It was black. Not thick like tar. Thin. Smelled like copper and dirt. I wiped it away fast, blinking, backing up until I hit the bathroom door. My heart was hammering. I'd never had nosebleeds before. Never seen anything come out of me that color. I glanced in the mirror again and saw a handprint on glass. Not mine. Smaller. Greasy, smudged, with long fingers and a thumb set too far down. Like the proportions were wrong. It was on the inside of the mirror. That night, the blood trail returned, thicker, bolder, almost like it was making a point. It didn't stop at the basement this time. It climbed the stairs to the second floor, to my bedroom, and circled the bed. I slept on the couch. Or tried to. That's when the knocking started. It came from the walls. Not loud. Rhythmic. 3 knocks at a time. Always 3. They traveled around the house. 1 in the kitchen wall. 1 near the attic door. 1 beneath the floor, right under the couch I was curled up on. I stopped answering my phone. I ignored the outside world. My only focus was survival and trying to figure out what the hell I had awakened. It was a few days later I finally spoke to someone about it. Not a friend. Not the police. Her name was Lorna. I found her name written in pencil on the back of a drawer in the guest bedroom. It was faint, curled in neat cursive with a phone number underneath that had the old area code from the 90s. On impulse, I called it. To my shock, someone picked up. An elderly woman, voice thin as paper. When I told her who I was and the address I lived at, she went silent. For almost a full minute. Then she said, "You shouldn't have gone into the basement." I froze. She told me her family had owned the house decades ago, back when the area was still farmland. Her little brother, Samuel, had gone missing one winter afternoon after playing outside. Police combed the neighborhood for weeks. No trace, not even footprints in the snow. Years later, during renovations, her father found something buried beneath the basement floor. A small coat, torn, yellow, with 3 baby teeth wrapped in paper tucked inside the lining. They moved out 2 days later. "You saw the circle, didn't you?" she asked. I said yes. She told me they used to hear something whispering through the heating vents. Her mother would find spoons missing, tiny shoe prints in the dust. Sometimes, her father would wake up with scratches on his ankles, like something had tried to pull him out of bed. "The blood comes before it takes something," she said. "It leaves a trail to your door, and if you don't open it, it comes through anyway." I asked her what it was, but she hung up. That night, I made a mistake. I followed the blood. It appeared around 3 a.m., like always. But this time, it didn't stop in the house. It led out the back door, across the patio, down the yard, into the woods that bordered the edge of the property. Something in me had to know, so I followed barefoot, wrapped in a hoodie, flashlight shaking in my hand. The trail wove through branches like veins. After about 100 yards, I saw something in the distance, a shape swaying gently. As I approached, I realized it was a swing set. Old, rusted, the kind with those hard plastic seats and metal chains. It hadn't been there the day before. I'm sure of it. But there it was, planted deep in the earth, roots wrapped around its legs like it had been waiting. And on the swing, moving softly back and forth, was the yellow coat. Empty. I was frozen. And then I heard it. A laugh. High-pitched. Right in my ear, though nothing was beside me. I ran. Branches clawed my arms. The flashlight flickered, then died. I sprinted until I hit the porch, flung the door open, and slammed it behind me. Panting, shaking, I turned around and saw a muddy footprint across the kitchen floor. Small, bare, leading into the house. The trail ended at the hallway mirror, and written on the glass, in fog from inside the room, were the words, "Let me back iron." I stopped sleeping. There's a difference between insomnia and terror. With insomnia, you're awake against your will, pacing or staring at the ceiling, frustrated and foggy. But when you're awake because you're afraid to close your eyes, it's something else entirely. Your heartbeat becomes your clock. You don't blink too long. You flinch when your own shadow moves. That was me now. Every single night. The blood trail had stopped appearing in its usual way. It no longer began outside or crept toward my bedroom door. Now it was already in the room. I would find thick, tacky red marks circling the walls. Once, I found them forming a spiral beneath my bed, not drawn or painted but soaked into the wooden floorboards, seeping upward as if the house were bleeding from below. The whispers had started to speak words. At first, it was just murmurs behind walls or faint hissing from the light fixtures. But one night, lying on the living room floor with my back to the fireplace, I heard something soft and perfectly clear. It said my name 3 times, not loudly, not in anger. It was the sound of something calling, gently, like a parent trying to wake a child for school. Evan. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Evan, open the door. There was no door near me. And then something knocked. From inside the fireplace. 3 slow, hollow knocks from behind the old brick wall. I bolted upright. The air smelled metallic. My phone buzzed, a message from a number I didn't know. Don't go back to sleep. That was all. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it. I just stared. The blood trail was shifting in behavior. It was no longer just a warning or a path. It was coiling, drawing shapes, symbols. Sometimes it looked like handprints had been dragged across the floor, streaks trailing behind them. Other times, the blood would form a perfect circle with smaller circles inside it, almost like an eye watching from beneath the house. One night, I found a trail rising vertically up the wall and ending just above the light switch, where something had been scratching at the plaster. Claw marks. Deep, irregular, like someone with broken fingers had tried to claw their way in. The final straw, the moment everything snapped, came 3 nights after the swing set incident. I woke up gasping, not from a nightmare, from a nosebleed so heavy I couldn't breathe. Blood ran down my face, soaked into my neck and pillow. My chest felt like it was being compressed. My ears were ringing. I stumbled into the bathroom and nearly screamed when I saw my reflection. The blood wasn't just from my nose, it was leaking from my ears too. The sink was full of pink water. The mirror fogged over despite the room being cold. And in the fog, letters began to write themselves. One at a time. I said, "Open the door." I ran. I packed a bag and left the house. I didn't even lock the door. I just drove for miles, found a roadside motel, and checked in with a fake name. But it followed. I know how that sounds. But the blood came with me. It was on my pillow at the motel. Small, dark pinpricks at first. The next night, they formed a circle. And by the 3rd night, the trail led from the bathroom to the bed and back again. As if something had stood over me while I slept, breathing. That night, I dreamed of the house. Except it wasn't a dream. I stood in my hallway, looking down toward the basement door. It was ajar. The blood was wet and slick on the walls, pulsing faintly, almost like it was alive. I walked toward it against my will. My hands were trembling. The air buzzed in my skull like bees. And when I reached the door and looked down the stairs, I saw someone standing there. In the dark, wearing the yellow coat, its head tilted upward. No face, no sound, just breathing. The coat moved in and out like lungs. And then it lifted a hand and pointed at me. I woke up screaming. But when I looked around the motel room, the blanket was gone. The window was open. And the words, "It's not the house. It's you," were written in condensation across the glass. That's when I understood. I hadn't brought the blood with me. It had always been inside me, and now it wanted out. There are moments when fear stops being sharp and becomes something dull and constant, like pain that never really fades. That was the version of myself living through those days. I wasn't scared the same way anymore. I didn't flinch at the sound of my name being whispered at night. I didn't cry when the blood dripped from the ceiling onto my food or when the lights flickered without cause. I just existed like I was waiting for something inevitable. I couldn't go back to the house, but staying away didn't matter anymore. It followed me, or more accurately, it had always been with me. The house wasn't haunted. I was. That realization settled over me like a layer of damp earth. Heavy. I remembered things I'd pushed down for years, small moments I had once written off. That ache in my nose as a child every time I visited that back bedroom. The way dogs would whimper when I passed them on the street. My mother's constant headaches and nosebleeds when I lived with her. She'd always blamed it on the heater, but we didn't have central heat. And now I had blood showing up in other people's homes. I spent 2 nights staying with a friend, Liam. I didn't tell him everything. I said I was dealing with some paranoia issues and needed to be around people. He agreed, reluctantly. The second night, I woke up at 3:07 a.m. to the sound of water running. The bathroom faucet was on. The sink was full, and Liam's toothbrush had been stabbed into a mound of bloody gauze that hadn't been there before. I backed out of the room slowly, only to see Liam standing at the end of the hallway. He was pale, barefoot, and had 2 lines of blood trailing from his nostrils down to his chest. He didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he said in a cracked voice, "There's something standing over you when you sleep. It makes the walls move." I left. He didn't stop me. I went back to the house. I don't know if it was surrender or desperation. All I knew was that I had to know the truth. Something inside those walls had attached itself to me, or maybe birthed itself through me. Whatever it was no longer content to follow. It wanted to consume, to become. The house had changed. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed it. The floors no longer creaked. The air was thick, almost gelatinous. Sound moved slowly. I couldn't hear my own footsteps. The hallway was darker than it should have been. The windows fogged from the inside, and the blood trail was waiting. But this time, it didn't start at the door. It started on the ceiling. Lines of dark crimson had been painted along the edges of the hall ceiling, spiraling inward toward a central point right above the attic pole chain. But something was wrong. The attic wasn't above that hallway. It was below. I walked to the hallway wall and pressed my palm flat against it. It was warm, vibrating faintly, like something breathing. I walked to the center of the house and dropped to my knees. I knocked against the floorboards, then again and again, until I heard it, a hollow sound, below the kitchen. There was something under the house. I hadn't seen it on the blueprints. There was no crawl space, no basement, nothing. But the blood trail was leading me there now. The boards beneath the kitchen table had gone soft, almost sponge-like. I grabbed a hammer and pried one up. Beneath it was darkness, and the smell. The overwhelming stench of iron, rot, and something sweet like spoiled fruit or decay that had gone sugary with time. I pulled away more boards until I saw it. A hidden trapdoor. Not new. Old. Older than the rest of the house. With rusted iron hinges and a ring-shaped handle caked with something I didn't want to identify. I should have run, but I didn't. I opened it. The descent was slow. A narrow wooden ladder led down into blackness. I brought a flashlight but the beam only penetrated about 5 feet before being swallowed up. Every step down made my chest feel tighter, like the pressure in the air was pushing against my lungs. When I reached the bottom, I almost slipped. The ground was wet. Not dirt, not concrete, something in between. And the walls were covered in handprints. Hundreds of them, some tiny like children's, others the size of frying pans, all of them outlined in dry blood. There was a corridor down there. At the end of it, something waited. I could hear it. Not footsteps, not breathing. Laughter. Small, wet, choking giggles. They echoed in a way that told me the space wasn't large, but it was alive. I kept walking, despite my body screaming to stop. At the end of the hall was a door, painted black. The same yellow coat I'd seen in my dreams was nailed to it. Just a coat. Empty, except it wasn't empty. Something shifted inside it as I approached. A handprint bloomed across the belly of the coat, pressing outward as if someone inside was reaching through the fabric. And then the whispering started again, but not behind the walls. Inside my head, it was saying my name. Not just Evan this time. Evan Michael, open the door. Let me wear you. I staggered backward. My nose exploded again, blood running down into my throat. I coughed and fell to one knee, struggling to stay conscious. My flashlight flickered, then died. And in the pitch black, something touched my face. A finger, wet, cold, and segmented, like a worm wearing a glove. I screamed, crawled backward, slammed the trapdoor shut behind me, and ran from the house, barefoot and soaked in blood. But I knew it was too late, because the blood trail didn't start at the house anymore. It started at my feet. I didn't expect to walk back in after that basement, after the laughter echoing in my skull. But I woke up in a storage unit next to my crushed duffel bag. My phone charger was tethered to the house alarm keypad inside. I must have gone back, sleepwalking or worse. I drove the long half-hour home in silence, the miles stretching like dread. The front door opened itself. I didn't need the key. The hallway was aflame with candlelight, half-melted wax lining the floor in a pattern identical to the blood spiral found beneath my bed. The candles flickered, warped by an unseen breeze. I stood paralyzed as the floorboards pitched beneath me, groaning, shifting like breathing. Every piece was in place, the dusty coat pinned to the basement door. The acid scent of rot permeating the air. Blood pooled at the bottom of the stairs, swirling into patterns. The hush of giggles behind walls and in closets. At 3:13 a.m., or what felt like it, the walls rippled. The door to the basement rose by itself, revealing faint light and dark, wet footprints from the house into the void below. A whisper called, "Evan, let in." I debated whether to run or fall down the stairs into whatever awaited me. But the trail made its decision. I started descending. I reached the bottom and gasped. The basement was now a tiled chamber, walls lined with grotesque tile mosaics of a yellow coat, flower petals, and tiny red footprints. In the center, a pedestal made of bone shards held 3 wax-sealed jars, each containing a child's tooth, floating in thick amber fluid. Behind the pedestal was a concrete altar, and stained on it was the final line, "Your door awaits." Underfoot, the blood at my feet began to rise like water flooding a sink. A voice, soft but infinite, echoed, "Bleed or let go." Memories flooded, my mother's nosebleeds. Strange winters, missing siblings, lantern-lit prayers over heat vents. I I realized I had carried this, bled into every home I inhabited. The blood trail was my inheritance, a legacy of unspoken pacts made by my father. To stop it, I had to give a jar, a child's tooth, in exchange like tithing, or everything would bleed, and not just blood. I knelt, hand trembling, the teeth in jars boiling as the candlelight flickered. I unscrewed the middle jar and dropped it onto the floor. Blood gasped from the cracks in the tile. The tooth floated free, face down, and blood welled up around the broken glass. I stood, pushed aside the pedestal, and walked to the stairs. The laughter followed me, rising to a cacophony of giggles and sobs. At the threshold, I paused. Then I walked out. I drove until sunrise, bleary-eyed and broken. I didn't go back. I sold the house. I left town. I keep the first tooth in a locked box under my bed. Every now and then, at 3:13 a.m., I feel a weight on my chest. Breathe, rasping into my ear. A crimson drop, ever so small, falls onto my blanket. But the trail doesn't form anymore. At least not yet. I don't know if I'm free. I only know the trail stops at my door for now. But if you ever find a red drop leading up to your threshold, don't follow it in, because whoever left it knows your name.